The wrench slipped from my hand and clattered against the concrete as I heard my wife's voice drift through the garage window. Mason Reddan, 44 years old, owner of Reddan's Auto Repair, reduced to eavesdropping on his own wife like some common neighborhood snoop. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Lennon, he's completely clueless," Ember whispered into her phone, thinking I couldn't hear her through the thin walls of our Ashfield home. "I'm leaving him soon. Just need him to crack first." I crouched there beside my battered F-150, grease under my fingernails and apparently egg on my face. 20 years of marriage, and this is what it had come to. My wife plotting my emotional breakdown like she was preparing for a court case, which, knowing Ember, she probably was. Ashfield used to be something, back when the foundry ran 3 shifts and the main street bustled with actual businesses instead of half-empty storefronts and check-cashing joints. Now it's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody's business, and most of that business involves figuring out who's sleeping with whom and who's about to lose their house. Perfect place for a scandal, really. I wiped my hands on an old rag and listened to Ember's voice grow more animated. She was in full lawyer mode now, that crisp, confident tone she used when she thought she had all the angles covered. The same voice that had charmed her way from small-town Ashfield girl to hotshot corporate attorney at Brennan and Associates downtown. "He won't see it coming," she continued. "Mason thinks I'm just going through a phase. Poor guy still believes we're happy." Poor guy? Right. The thing about being underestimated your whole life is that you learn to use it. People look at a guy like me, flannel shirts, calloused hands, drives a truck older than some of his employees, and they see simple. They see predictable. They see someone who won't cause trouble. They see wrong. I'd suspected something was off for months. Ember's late nights at the office had become routine. Her phone, once casually left on counters and nightstands, now went everywhere with her. New passwords on everything, cold shoulders that had nothing to do with Ashfield's brutal winters. And then there were the receipts. I'm a detail guy. You have to be when you run a business. Every invoice, every expense, every transaction gets recorded and filed. So when I started finding receipts for dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together, hotel stays during her business conferences, and charges for lingerie I'd never seen, well, the picture started coming into focus. But I'm also a patient man. Ember always said it was my worst quality, my tendency to sit back and watch instead of jumping into action. Tonight, though, patience was about to pay off. "The lake house reservation is confirmed for this weekend," Ember was saying. 2 nights, just like you wanted." Lake house. That was new information. I pulled out my phone and opened the cloud storage app I'd installed months ago. Funny thing about being married to a lawyer. You learn to document everything. Every suspicious conversation, every odd expense, every late-night phone call, all backed up to a secure server that Ember didn't even know existed. The garage door creaked as I stood up. Through the window, I could see Ember pacing in our kitchen, still on her call. Her auburn hair was pulled back in that severe bun she wore for important meetings. She'd changed out of her court clothes into jeans and a sweater, but she still looked like she was preparing for battle. "I have to go," she said suddenly. "He's coming in." By the time I walked through the back door, Ember was standing at the sink, rinsing a coffee cup with the focused attention of someone who definitely hadn't been plotting her husband's emotional destruction 30 seconds earlier. "How's the truck?" she asked without turning around. Same as always, running on spite and stubbornness. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Sounds familiar. "Yeah, well, we all have our coping mechanisms." Ember finally turned to look at me, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe. Or just irritation that her phone call had been interrupted. Hard to tell the difference anymore. "I'll be working late tomorrow," she said. "Big case coming up." "The Hendricks contract dispute?" "Something like that?" "Something like that." Right. The Hendricks case had been settled 2 weeks ago. I knew because I'd seen the celebration dinner receipt from Romano's, party of 2, bottle of champagne, charged to her personal card. "Well," I said, grabbing a beer from the fridge, "I'll try not to wait up." You never do anymore. True enough. Hard to miss someone when you know they're not really gone. Just somewhere else with someone else. I watched Ember gather her things. Laptop bag, coffee cup, phone clutched protectively in her hand. She was beautiful. I'd give her that. 41 years old and still turned heads when she walked into a room. Smart, successful, ambitious. Everything a guy like me was supposed to feel lucky to have. Everything I was apparently about to lose. "Mason?" she said, pausing at the kitchen doorway. "Yeah? We should talk soon. About us, I mean." There it was, the opening move, the setup for whatever conversation she'd been rehearsing with Lennon. Sure, I said, taking a long pull from my beer. Whenever you're ready. She nodded and disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing certainty that my marriage was about to become a case study in how quickly 20 years could turn to ash. I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. Now, time to start documenting everything in real time. If Ember wanted to play lawyer games, she was about to learn that her husband had been taking notes. Outside, Ashfield settled into its usual evening rhythm. Porch lights flickered on, dogs barked at shadows, and somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed off the abandoned foundry walls. The sound of a town slowly grinding to a halt. Perfect soundtrack for a marriage doing the same thing. 3 days later, I was elbow deep in the engine of Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick when my phone buzzed with a text from Ember. Working late again, don't wait up. I glanced at the timestamp. 2:30 in the afternoon. Either Ember had developed psychic powers about her workload, or she was planning another evening with Lennon Brasken. Time to find out which. I'd done my research on Lennon. 38 years old, IT director at Brennan & Associates, drove a Tesla Model S, and lived in one of those glass and steel condos downtown that cost more than most people's houses. The kind of guy who wore designer jeans and called them denim, who probably had strong opinions about coffee beans and craft cocktails. Everything I wasn't, in other words. Hey, boss, called Tommy from across the garage. You want me to finish up the Buick? Tommy Kowalski had been working for me for 6 years, ever since he graduated high school and decided college wasn't for him. Good kid, reliable, and smart enough to know when his boss was distracted. Yeah, thanks. I need to run an errand. Everything okay? You've been kind of, I don't know, intense lately? Intense. That was one way to put it. Just working through some things. Tommy nodded like that explained everything. Maybe it did. In a town like Ashfield, everybody was always working through something. I cleaned up and headed home, knowing Ember would still be at the office for at least another hour. Our house sat on Maple Street, 3 blocks from downtown in what used to be the nice part of town. 2-story colonial, white picket fence, big oak tree in the front yard. The American dream in vinyl siding and mortgage payments. Ember's home office was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the backyard. She'd claimed it when she started working from home more often, filling it with law books and case files and a computer setup that probably cost more than my truck. I stood in the doorway, looking at her desk. Ember was careful. Too careful to leave anything incriminating lying around, but she was also human, and humans make mistakes. The desk drawers were locked, but I'd been married to Ember long enough to know her hiding spots. The spare key was taped under the bottom drawer, right where she'd put it 3 years ago when she bought the new desk. Inside the top drawer, bills, business cards, a few old case files. Nothing interesting. The 2nd drawer held office supplies and a bottle of aspirin. The 3rd drawer, though, that's where things got interesting. Hotel receipts. 3 of them, all from the Grandview Inn about 20 miles outside town. All charged to Ember's personal credit card. All for weekend stays I definitely hadn't been part of. But it was the 4th item that made my hands shake. A photograph. Printed on regular copy paper, but clear enough. Ember and Lennon at some restaurant I didn't recognize, sitting close together, his hand on hers across the table. They were both laughing at something, looking comfortable and intimate in a way that made my stomach clench. On the back, someone had written L&E, first official date, in Ember's handwriting. First official date. Like they were teenagers instead of 2 adults destroying a 20-year marriage. I took pictures of everything with my phone, then carefully put it all back exactly where I'd found it. My hands were steady now, my mind clear. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder and more focused. Planning mode. Back downstairs, I opened my laptop and started a new document. Time to get organized. If Ember wanted to play games, she was about to discover that her husband was better at strategy than she'd given him credit for. I started with what I knew for certain. The hotel receipts, the photograph, the overheard phone conversation. Then I added what I suspected. Regular meetings disguised as work, the lake house reservation, probably a whole network of lies I hadn't uncovered yet. The front door opened at 6:15, right on schedule. Ember called out a greeting as she dropped her keys on the hall table, same routine as always. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of chili and acting like a man who hadn't just discovered his wife's secret life. "Smells good," she said, appearing in the doorway. "Figured we could eat together for once." "About that." She hesitated, and I could practically see her recalibrating. "I might need to work through dinner. Big presentation tomorrow." "On a Friday?" "Client meeting. You know how it is?" I knew exactly how it was. "Sure, I'll put some aside for you." Ember nodded and started to leave, then stopped. "Mason, about that conversation I mentioned. Maybe this weekend?" This weekend? I stirred the chili, keeping my voice casual. Thought you had that business retreat at the lake. The silence stretched just a beat too long. Right, the retreat. Maybe next week then? Sure, whenever works for you. She disappeared upstairs, and I heard the shower start running. Getting ready for another evening with Lennon, no doubt. I wondered if she'd wear the black dress, the one she used to save for special occasions with me. My phone buzzed. Text message from Jules Harper, my old friend who ran the boxing gym downtown. Beer tonight? You look like you could use one. Jules was an ex-cop, retired early after a back injury that left him walking with a slight limp. He'd opened Harper's gym in an old warehouse near the foundry, and it had become the unofficial gathering place for Ashfield's working-class crowd, the kind of place where you could drink beer, hit heavy bags, and complain about life without anyone judging you for it. Can't tonight, I texted back. But rain check? Everything okay? Working through some things. That's what everybody says right before their world explodes. Jules always did have a talent for cutting through nonsense. I'll call you tomorrow. You better. Ember came downstairs 40 minutes later, wearing the black dress. Her hair was down, makeup carefully applied, perfume that I hadn't smelled in months. She looked beautiful and guilty, and completely unaware that her husband was documenting her every move. Don't wait up, she said, grabbing her purse. Wouldn't dream of it. The door closed behind her, and I was alone again with my thoughts and my growing collection of evidence. I pulled up the cloud storage app and uploaded the new photos, adding detailed notes about dates and times. Then I did something I'd never done before in 20 years of marriage. I followed her. Ember's BMW was easy to track through Ashfield's quiet streets. She drove carefully, like someone who couldn't afford to get pulled over. Heading downtown toward the fancy part of the city where people like Lennon lived, she parked in the visitors section of Harbor Point condominiums, a gleaming tower that looked like it belonged in a bigger city. I watched from across the street as she walked through the lobby like she owned the place, confident and comfortable, like she'd done this before, many times. I sat in my truck for 2 hours, watching the lights in what I assumed was Lennon's unit. Occasionally, I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. 2 people, close together, living a life that should have been mine. At 11 o'clock, I drove home and went to bed. Alone, as usual, but not defeated. Not anymore. The next morning, Ember was already gone when I woke up. A note on the kitchen counter. Left early for the retreat. Back Sunday night. E. No love, no miss you. Just an initial, like she was signing a business memo. Perfect. That gave me the entire weekend to prepare for the conversation she'd been promising. The one where she'd try to control me with threats and ultimatums. The one where she'd discover that Mason Reddan wasn't nearly as clueless as she thought. Saturday morning found me at Harper's gym, working out my frustrations on a heavy bag while Jules watched from behind the front counter. The gym was mostly empty, just a few regulars going through their routines and trying to sweat out their weekday demons. You're hitting that thing like it owes you money, Jules observed. I threw another combination, feeling the satisfying impact travel up my arms. Maybe it does. Want to talk about it? That was Jules, direct and to the point. 20 years as a cop had taught him when someone was carrying weight they couldn't handle alone. I stopped hitting the bag and grabbed a towel. Ember's having an affair. Jules didn't look surprised. In a town like Ashfield, secrets had a short shelf life. How long have you known? Suspected for months. Confirmed it yesterday. You sure? I pulled out my phone and showed him the photograph I'd found in Ember's desk. Jules studied it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Lennon Brasken, he said finally. Fancy boy from the law firm. You know him? Know of him. Comes in here sometimes, acts like he's slumming it with the locals, tips the bartender with 20s and talks about his Tesla. Sounds about right. Jules handed me back the phone. So, what's your plan? That was the question, wasn't it? What was my plan? I could confront them, demand explanations, beg Ember to reconsider. I could file for divorce and hope for the best in court. I could pretend I didn't know and hope the affair burned itself out. Or I could do something else entirely. She's going to try to break up with me, I said. Probably tomorrow night when she gets back. Make it seem like her idea, like I drove her away. Classic move. Take control of the narrative. Exactly. But what if I don't play along? Jules raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? What if I agree with her? What if I make it easy? You'd just give up? I'd call her bluff. Understanding dawned in Jules's eyes. You think she's not ready? I know she's not ready. Ember's a planner. She likes to have all her pieces in place before she makes a move. Right now, she's still married to me, still has access to our joint accounts, still gets to play the victim when this all comes out. But if you beat her to the punch, then she's scrambling. Then she's reacting instead of controlling. Jules grinned. Devious. I like it. I spent the rest of the morning at the gym, working out the details of my plan. It had to be surgical, precise, legal, and completely devastating. Ember had spent months maneuvering herself into position for a clean getaway. Time to show her what real preparation looked like. First stop, the bank. Ashfield First National had been handling my business accounts for 15 years. Jim Morrison, the branch manager, knew me well enough to fast-track the paperwork I needed. You sure about this, Mason? Jim asked, reviewing the account changes I'd requested. This is pretty drastic. Just protecting my interests. And Ember's okay with this? I met his eyes steadily. Ember will understand. The changes were simple but effective. Our joint checking and savings accounts were restructured to require both signatures for any transaction over $50. The business accounts, which were solely in my name, were moved to a different bank entirely. The credit cards linked to our joint accounts were canceled and replaced with new ones that only I could access. All perfectly legal. All documented. All designed to give Ember a very unpleasant surprise when she tried to finance her new life with Lennon. Next stop, the house. I spent Saturday afternoon going through our belongings with the methodical attention I usually reserved for engine diagnostics. 20 years of marriage generates a lot of stuff, and most of it was clearly mine or clearly Ember's. The few disputed items, wedding gifts, shared purchases, I photographed and documented. Then I called Morrison Moving and Storage. I need some boxes, I told the dispatcher, and maybe a truck on standby for tomorrow evening. Moving? Something like that. Sunday passed slowly. I cleaned the house, did laundry, and tried to act like a man enjoying a quiet weekend alone. But my mind was racing, running through contingencies and backup plans. At 4 o'clock, I changed the locks. It wasn't vindictive, it was practical. If Ember was planning to leave anyway, there was no reason for her to have access to a house she no longer wanted to share. The locksmith, a guy named Pete who'd done work for me before, didn't ask questions. You want me to leave the old keys somewhere? Pete asked as he finished up. No need, I'll handle it. At 6:30, I heard Ember's BMW pull into the driveway. Showtime. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee like this was any other Sunday evening. The front door rattled as Ember tried her key, then rattled again. Footsteps on the porch. The doorbell rang. I took my time getting up, folded the newspaper carefully, and walked to the front door. Through the peephole, I could see Ember standing there with her overnight bag, looking confused and irritated. I opened the door. My key doesn't work, she said. I changed the locks. You what? Changed the locks. Figured it was time. Ember stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Mason, what's going on? Come in. We should talk. She followed me into the living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I gestured to the couch, but she remained standing. Why did you change the locks? Security reasons. What security reasons? I sat down in my recliner, the one Ember always complained about, but I'd refused to replace. You said we needed to talk. About us. Yes, but... So let's talk. Ember set down her overnight bag and perched on the edge of the couch. She was still wearing her weekend casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, but there was tension in her posture now. Uncertainty. Good. Mason, she began, I've been thinking a lot about our marriage, about where we are, where we're going. Okay. I think we've grown apart. We want different things now. Such as? I don't know. Everything. We barely talk anymore. We don't share interests. We're like strangers living in the same house. All true, actually. Though she'd left out the part about her sharing interests with Lennon Brasken instead. So what are you saying? I asked. Ember took a deep breath. I think we should break up. There it was. The moment she'd been building toward for months. Her big move, her power play, her attempt to control the narrative of our marriage's end. Time to disappoint her. All right, I said calmly. Your things will be by the door in an hour. The color drained from Ember's face. What? You want to break up? I agree. Your stuff will be packed and ready to go in an hour. Mason, that's not... I didn't mean... What did you mean? She was scrambling now, trying to regain control of a conversation that had already slipped away from her. I meant we should talk about it, discuss our options. Maybe try counseling first. Why? You just said we want different things. Sounds like you've already made up your mind. But we can't just... there are logistics to consider. The house, the accounts, legal issues. Logistics. Of course, that's what she was worried about. Not our 20-year marriage, not the life we'd built together, but the practical details of dismantling it all. I've already handled the logistics, I said. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed her the bank documents I'd photographed. Joint accounts are frozen pending divorce proceedings. Credit cards are canceled. Your name's been removed from all the utilities and subscriptions. Ember stared at the screen, her lawyer's mind processing the implications. You can't do that. Already did. This is financial abuse. No, this is preparation. You want out? Fine. But you don't get to have it both ways. She was standing now, pacing the length of the living room. Mason, you're being unreasonable. We need to discuss this like adults. We are discussing it. You said you wanted to break up. I said, okay. What's left to discuss? Everything. The house, the division of assets, spousal support. That's what lawyers are for. Ember stopped pacing and looked at me with something approaching panic. This wasn't how she'd planned it. She was supposed to be in control, supposed to be the one calling the shots. Mason, she said, her voice softer now. That's not what I meant. I just think we need some space to figure things out. Space like a lake house weekend with Lennon Brasken? The words hung in the air like smoke. Ember's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, denial, calculation, and finally resignation. How long have you known? She asked quietly. Long enough. And you didn't say anything? I put up with your affairs for a long time. Now it's time to end it. Ember sank back onto the couch, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling. Mason, I can explain. No need. Your suitcases are upstairs. I'll help you pack. The next hour was the longest of my life. Ember moved through our bedroom like a sleepwalker, mechanically folding clothes and packing toiletries while I watched from the doorway. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? When she reached for the jewelry box on her dresser, I cleared my throat. Just what you brought to the marriage, I said. Her hand froze over the diamond necklace I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. Mason, please. Can't we be reasonable about this? I am being reasonable. That necklace cost me 3 months' salary. The earrings were for your birthday last year. The watch was our anniversary gift. But they were gifts. From a marriage you just ended. She pulled back her hand like the jewelry had burned her. Smart move. Everything in that box was documented, receipted, and photographed. If she wanted to fight over assets, I was ready. The clothes were easier. Ember had expensive tastes and a closet full of designer suits and dresses that clearly belonged to her. I helped her carry the suitcases downstairs, playing the part of the helpful husband right up to the end. At the front door, Ember turned to face me one last time. This doesn't have to be ugly, she said. We can work something out, split things fairly. I'm sure we can. I never meant for it to happen this way. Sure you did. She flinched. That's not fair. Fair? I almost laughed. Ember, you've been planning this for months. The affair, the breakup speech, probably already have a lawyer picked out. The only thing you didn't plan for was me not playing along. I made mistakes, but you made choices. There's a difference. Ember picked up her suitcases and walked toward her car. Halfway down the driveway, she turned back. Where am I supposed to go? I hear Harbor Point Condominiums has nice units. The shot hit home. Ember's face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she might come back and try to fight. Instead, she got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing in my doorway watching 20 years disappear into the Ashfield night. I went back inside and poured myself a whiskey. The house felt different now, emptier but somehow cleaner, like I'd finally gotten rid of something that had been making me sick without realizing it. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. I typed back, Yes, it is. Another buzz. You can't just throw away 20 years. I didn't. You did. The phone went quiet after that. I finished my whiskey and went to bed in a house that was finally completely mine. But if I thought Ember was going to accept defeat gracefully, I was about to learn how wrong I could be. The next morning, I woke up to someone pounding on my front door. I checked the clock, 6:30 a.m. Through the peephole, I could see a Ashfield police cruiser parked in my driveway. I opened the door to find Officer Janet Reeves, a woman I'd known since high school, standing on my porch with an uncomfortable expression. Morning, Janet. Mason, I'm sorry about this, but I need to ask you some questions. About what? Your wife filed a complaint yesterday evening. Says you threatened her and illegally locked her out of her own home. I stepped aside and gestured her in. Coffee? This isn't a social call, Mason. I know, but it's early, and I could use the caffeine. Janet followed me into the kitchen, taking notes as I explained the previous evening's events. I was careful to stick to the facts. Ember had asked for a breakup. I'd agreed. She'd left voluntarily. She says you changed the locks without warning, Janet said. I changed the locks after she said she wanted to leave. Seemed practical. And the bank accounts? Joint accounts, frozen pending divorce proceedings. Standard procedure. Janet closed her notebook. Mason, I've got to ask. Did you threaten your wife in any way? I told her she could pack her things and leave. If that's a threat, then yeah, I threatened her. You know that's not what I mean. I met her eyes. Janet, you've known me for 30 years. Have I ever been violent? Ever been arrested? Ever even raised my voice in public? No. Then why would I start now? She nodded and put away her notebook. For what it's worth, I don't think you did anything wrong. But Ember's got lawyers, and lawyers make noise. Let them make noise. I've got documentation for everything. After Janet left, I called in sick to work and spent the morning preparing for war. Because that's what this was now. War. Ember had fired the first shot with her police complaint, trying to paint me as an abusive husband who'd trapped and threatened her. Time to return fire. I started with the evidence I'd already collected, the hotel receipts, the photograph, the documented timeline of her affair. Then I added the new material, recordings of our breakup conversation, legal in our state with one-party consent, bank records showing her unusual spending patterns, and a detailed log of her late nights and weekend business trips. By noon, I had a file that would make any divorce attorney salivate. Then my phone rang. Jules. You okay? Heard there was a police car at your house this morning. Ember's trying to control the narrative. Figured. You need backup? Not yet, but I might soon. What do you need? I thought about it. Jules had connections all over Ashfield. Ex-cops, bartenders, mechanics, people who saw everything and remembered most of it. People who might have noticed a BMW parked outside Harbor Point condominiums on a regular basis. Information, I said. About Ember and Lennon. How long it's been going on, how public they've been, who else knows. I'll make some calls. Thanks. Mason, don't do anything stupid. I know you're angry, but... I'm not angry, I said. I'm focused. That afternoon, I got a visit from someone I'd been expecting, a Lennon Brasken himself. I was in my garage working on an oil change for Mrs. Chen's Honda when a Tesla Model S pulled into my driveway. The car was pristine white with custom rims and tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that announced its owner's success from 3 blocks away. Lennon climbed out wearing designer jeans and a leather jacket that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He was taller than I'd expected, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested regular gym visits and expensive grooming products. Mason Reddan? That's me. We need to talk. I wiped my hands on a rag and studied him. Up close, Lennon looked younger than his 38 years, with the kind of soft features that suggested he'd never been in a real fight. His hands were smooth and uncalloused, his posture confident in the way of someone who'd never had to worry about money or consequences. About what? About Ember? About this situation you've created. I didn't create anything. I just stopped pretending I didn't know about it. Lennon stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate me. Look, I understand you're upset, but Ember and I, what we have is real. You can't just ignore that. I'm not ignoring it. I'm ending it. You're being selfish. Ember deserves to be happy. I almost laughed at that. Ember deserves a lot of things. A faithful marriage probably should have been one of them. Your marriage was over long before I came along. Maybe, but it's definitely over now. Lennon's confidence wavered slightly. She's not going to give up, you know. Ember's a fighter. Good for her. And neither am I. Now I did laugh. What exactly are you going to do, Lennon? Sue me? Beat me up? Key my truck? I have resources. So do I. We stared at each other for a long moment. 2 men fighting over a woman who'd already made her choice, except one of us was smart enough to realize the fight was already over. Ember's scared, Lennon said finally. You froze her out of everything without warning. That's not fair. Fair? I set down my wrench and gave him my full attention. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been Ember asking for a divorce before she started sleeping with you. Fair would have been honesty instead of lies. Fair would have been 20 years of marriage, meaning something more than an inconvenient obstacle to her happiness. People change. Relationships end. It doesn't have to be vindictive. You're right, it doesn't have to be, but it is. Lennon tried a different approach. Look, we're both adults here. Ember and I are in love. You can't change that by making her life difficult. I'm not trying to change anything. I'm just making sure I don't get screwed over in the process. She just wants what's fair. Then she can hire a lawyer and fight for it." Lennon's mask slipped, revealing the entitled anger underneath. "You can't just cut her off like this. She has rights." "So do I. She's going to destroy you in court." "Maybe, but she'll have to explain a lot of hotel receipts and restaurant bills first." That hit home. Lennon's face went pale as he realized I had documentation of their affair. In a no-fault divorce state, it might not matter legally, but it would certainly matter socially. Ashfield was a small town, and small towns loved their scandals. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Probably, but it's my mistake to make." Lennon got back in his Tesla and drove away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing certainty that this was just the beginning. That evening, Jules called with his report. "Your wife and her boyfriend have been the worst-kept secret in Ashfield for 6 months," he said. "They've been seen together at restaurants, hotels, even walking around downtown holding hands. Half the town knows, but nobody wanted to be the one to tell you." "Great. Gets worse. Lennon's been bragging about it at Murphy's bar. Calls you a clueless small-town mechanic who doesn't deserve a woman like Ember." My jaw clenched. "Is that right?" "There's more. Ember's been telling people at her firm that you're controlling and emotionally distant, setting up the narrative for when she files for divorce. She's been planning this for a while. Looks like it. But here's the thing. Nobody's buying it. People in this town know you, Mason. They know what kind of man you are. And they know what kind of woman leaves her husband for a guy who drives a car worth more than most people's houses." That was something, at least. In a divorce, public opinion might not matter legally, but it mattered in every other way that counted. "What else?" "Lennon's got some financial problems. Owes money to some people who don't like waiting for payment. Word is, he's been counting on Ember's divorce settlement to bail him out." "Interesting. What kind of people?" "The kind who break legs when they don't get paid." "Even more interesting. How much does he owe?" "Enough that he needs Ember's money more than she needs his love." I hung up the phone and poured myself another whiskey. The picture was getting clearer now. Ember thought she was in control of her exit strategy, but she was just another mark in Lennon's long-term financial plan. Time to make sure they both got exactly what they deserved. The next few days passed in a blur of legal maneuvering and small-town gossip. Ember hired Patricia Vance, the most expensive divorce attorney in the county, and filed papers demanding spousal support, half the house, and a chunk of my business. I hired Jim Bradley, a scrappy local lawyer who specialized in protecting working-class guys from their soon-to-be ex-wives. Jim took one look at my documentation and grinned like a man who'd just been dealt a royal flush. "This is beautiful work," he said, flipping through the file I'd assembled. "Hotel receipts, photographs, timeline documentation. She's going to have a hard time claiming you were the problem in this marriage." "What about her demands?" "Spousal support? Maybe, but probably not much given the affair. The house? Depends on how much equity is in it and whether she can prove she contributed to the payments. Your business? Not a chance. That's premarital assets and sweat equity. So what's her strategy? Probably hoping you'll settle to avoid a public trial. Divorce proceedings are public record, and all this evidence becomes part of that record. Most guys don't want their personal business spread across the local newspaper." "I'm not most guys." "I was hoping you'd say that." While the lawyers did their dance, I focused on the more immediate problem of Ember and Lennon's campaign to make my life miserable. The police complaint had been just the beginning. Someone, and I had a pretty good idea who, had been calling my business customers, suggesting that I was going through some personal issues that might affect my work quality. 3 clients canceled their appointments, and 2 more asked if I was stable enough to work on their cars. Someone had also been spreading rumors about my finances, suggesting that the business was in trouble and I might not be able to honor my warranties. In a small town like Ashfield, that kind of talk could destroy a reputation built over 20 years. But 2 could play that game. I started with Lennon's debt problems, a few casual conversations with the right people, and word began to spread that the hotshot IT director was in over his head financially, that his flashy lifestyle was built on borrowed money and borrowed time. Then I moved on to Ember's professional reputation. I'd kept copies of all her client files from when she worked from home, and some of those files contained information that her clients might find interesting, like billing them for hours she'd actually spent with Lennon. I didn't do anything illegal, just made sure the right information reached the right people at the right time. The counterattack began on Thursday morning. I was opening the garage when Patricia Vance's paralegal served me with papers demanding an emergency hearing on Ember's spousal support claim. According to the filing, I was deliberately attempting to impoverish my estranged wife by cutting off her access to marital funds. Jim Bradley laughed when I showed him the papers. "They're desperate," he said. "This is a Hail Mary play." Will it work? Not with what we have on them, but it'll cost them money to find that out. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. That gave me 4 days to prepare for what would essentially be the opening round of our divorce war. I spent Friday gathering character witnesses, customers who could testify to my stability and reliability, neighbors who'd seen Ember's late-night comings and goings, business associates who could speak to my financial responsibility. Saturday, I got an unexpected visitor. I was working in my garage when a black BMW pulled into the driveway. But it wasn't Ember who got out. It was a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-30s, professionally dressed, with the kind of sharp features that suggested she was used to getting her way. "Mason Reddan?" "Depends who's asking." "Vivian Stoll. I'm a friend of Ember's." I'd heard the name. Viv was Ember's college roommate and current confidant, the kind of friend who enabled bad decisions and provided alibis when needed. "What can I do for you?" "I think we should talk." "About what?" "About ending this before it gets ugly." I wiped my hands and studied her. Viv had the same predatory confidence as Ember, the same assumption that she could manipulate any situation to her advantage. It's already ugly. It doesn't have to be. Ember's willing to be reasonable. Reasonable how? She'll drop the spousal support claim if you agree to a 50-50 split of the marital assets. And in return? You don't drag the affair through court. Keep it private, keep it civilized. I almost laughed. You mean keep it quiet so Ember doesn't have to face the consequences of her choices? I mean protect everyone involved from unnecessary embarrassment. Everyone except me. Viv's smile was razor sharp. You're a small-town mechanic, Mason. This kind of scandal might actually help your business, the wronged husband, the faithful working man. But Ember's a professional. Her reputation matters. Should have thought of that before she started sleeping with Lennon. People make mistakes. People make choices. Viv tried a different approach. Look, I understand you're hurt, but dragging this out won't bring her back. It'll just make everyone miserable. I'm not trying to bring her back. I'm trying to make sure I don't get screwed over. 50-50 is fair. 50-50 of what? The house I've been paying for? The business I built from nothing? The savings account I've been contributing to for 20 years while she spent money on hotel rooms and expensive dinners? Marriage is a partnership. Marriage is a partnership. Divorce is a business transaction. Viv's mask slipped, revealing the calculation underneath. You're being vindictive. I'm being practical. Ember has rights. So do I. She tried one more time. What do you want, Mason? What would it take to end this quietly? I thought about it. What did I want? I wanted my wife to have been faithful. I wanted 20 years of my life to have meant something. I wanted to trust the woman I'd married. But what I wanted and what I could get were two different things. I want Ember to admit what she did, I said finally. I want her to take responsibility for her choices instead of trying to blame me for the consequences. That's not going to happen. Then we'll see you in court. Viv left without another word, and I went back to work with the growing certainty that Monday's hearing was going to be a war. But I'd been preparing for war since the night Ember tried to break up with me, and I was ready. Sunday evening, Jim Bradley called with last-minute intelligence. Ember's planning to testify that you've been emotionally abusive for years, he said. Claims you isolated her from friends, controlled her spending, and threatened her when she tried to leave. Any evidence? Just her word. But she's a lawyer, and she knows how to present a case. What about our evidence? We'll present it if we have to, but I'd rather save it for the main event. The divorce trial? Exactly. Let them think they're winning the small battles while we prepare for the big one. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with a kind of bitter wind that cut through your jacket and reminded you that winter in Ashfield was nothing to mess around with. I put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to my wedding 20 years ago, and drove to the courthouse. Ember was already there with her legal team, looking every inch the successful professional in a tailored black suit and minimal jewelry. She'd pulled her hair back in a severe bun and wore just enough makeup to look competent and trustworthy. She looked like a woman who'd been wronged, not a woman who'd been caught. Lennon was there too, sitting in the back row like a supportive friend instead of the reason we were all there. He'd dressed down for the occasion, khakis and a button-down shirt instead of his usual designer gear, probably trying to look less like the wealthy homewrecker he actually was. The hearing itself was a carefully choreographed performance. Patricia Vance presented Ember as a vulnerable woman who'd been cut off from her financial resources by a controlling husband. Ember testified with just the right amount of emotion, describing how I'd trapped her by freezing the accounts and changing the locks. She was good. I had to give her that. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her myself. Jim Bradley kept our response simple. He presented bank records showing that Ember had been spending increasing amounts on personal expenses, restaurants, hotels, clothing, without discussing it with me. He showed utility records proving that Ember had voluntarily left the house. He presented character witnesses who testified that I'd never shown any signs of controlling or abusive behavior. Then he dropped the first bomb. "Your Honor," he said, "we'd like to present evidence that Mrs. Reddan has been engaged in an extramarital affair for approximately 6 months." Patricia Vance objected immediately, but the damage was done. The judge allowed Jim to present a limited amount of evidence, enough to establish that Ember had been unfaithful, not enough to reveal the full scope of my documentation. The hotel receipt was enough. I watched Ember's face as Jim presented the receipt from the Grandview Inn, dated just 2 weeks earlier. Her carefully composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the panic underneath. The judge took 15 minutes to reach his decision. "Mrs. Reddan's request for emergency spousal support is denied," he said. "The evidence suggests that she voluntarily left the marital home and has been maintaining a separate relationship. Mr. Reddan's actions in securing the marital assets appear to be prudent financial management, rather than vindictive behavior." Ember's face went white. Patricia Vance whispered furiously in her ear. But the damage was done. They'd lost the first round, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. As we filed out of the courthouse, Lennon caught up with me in the parking lot. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah, it is. You think you're so smart, but you don't know what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A guy who seduces married women and a woman who thinks she's smarter than she actually is. Ember's going to destroy you. Ember's going to try. There's a difference." Lennon stepped closer, trying to intimidate me. "You have no idea what kind of resources we have. Resources like your gambling debts? Or resources like Ember's billing irregularities?" His face went pale. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know more than you think." I got in my truck and drove away, leaving Lennon standing in the courthouse parking lot looking like a man who just realized he was in over his head. Because he was. They both were. And I was just getting started. The week after the hearing, Ashfield felt different. Word of Ember's affair had spread through town like wildfire. And everywhere I went, people were choosing sides. The coffee shop, the grocery store, Murphy's bar. Everyone had an opinion about Mason Reddan and his cheating wife. Most of the opinions were in my favor. "Always knew that woman thought she was too good for this town," Mrs. Peterson said when she picked up her Buick, acting all high and mighty while she was stepping out on a good man. "You're better off without her," added Frank Morrison from the hardware store. "Some women just can't appreciate what they have." The support felt good, but it also made me realize how public this whole mess had become. In a town like Ashfield, your business was everyone's business, whether you wanted it that way or not. Ember, meanwhile, was learning that lesson the hard way. Jules called me Thursday afternoon with an update from his network of bartenders and gossips. "Your wife's been making the rounds," he said, "trying to drum up support, telling anyone who'll listen that you're a controlling husband who drove her into another man's arms." Anyone buying it? Not really. Turns out people remember her acting superior at town events, complaining about Ashfield being too small for her ambitions. Hard to play the victim when half the town thinks you're a snob. What about Lennon? He's laying low. Word is he's worried about his job now that the affair's public knowledge. Brennan and Associates doesn't like scandal, especially when it involves their IT director and one of their attorneys. That was interesting. I'd assumed Lennon's position was secure, but apparently corporate law firms were more image-conscious than I'd realized. Anything else? Yeah. Ember's been asking around about your finances, trying to figure out how much the business is worth, what kind of assets you might be hiding. She won't find much. I've always been straightforward about money. That's what I told her friend Viv when she came sniffing around Murphy's last night. Viv was at Murphy's? Buying drinks for anyone who'd talk about you. Real subtle. I hung up and considered this new development. Ember was getting desperate, using her friends to gather intelligence about my financial situation. That suggested her legal team wasn't confident about their case. Good. Let them scramble. Friday evening, I was closing up the garage when Patricia Vance herself showed up. The high-powered divorce attorney looked out of place in my working-class neighborhood, her designer suit and luxury sedan marking her as clearly as a neon sign. "Mr. Reddan, I wonder if we could talk." "About what?" "About reaching a reasonable settlement." I thought that's what the hearing was for. Patricia smiled the kind of smile that probably cost her clients $500 an hour. The hearing was just a preliminary matter. I'm talking about the bigger picture, which is ending this marriage without destroying both parties in the process. I gestured toward my office, a cluttered room behind the garage bay that served as my business headquarters. Patricia followed me in, carefully avoiding the oil stains on the concrete floor. "Nice place," she said, looking around at the automotive calendars and parts catalogs that covered the walls. "It pays the bills." "I'm sure it does. But divorce can be expensive, Mr. Reddan. Legal fees, court costs, expert witnesses, it adds up quickly." "I'm sure it does, especially at your hourly rate." Patricia's smile didn't waver. "My client is prepared to be reasonable. She's willing to waive spousal support in exchange for a fair division of assets." "Define fair. 50% of the house, 40% of your business, and half of all marital savings and investments." I almost laughed. "That's your idea of reasonable?" "It's standard for a 20-year marriage. Standard for a marriage where both parties contributed equally. Ember's been a lawyer for 5 years. Before that, she was in school while I supported her. Before that, she worked part-time while I built the business. Marriage is a partnership. So everyone keeps telling me, but partnerships require both partners to honor their commitments." Patricia tried a different approach. "Mr. Reddan, I understand you're angry, but dragging this through a public trial won't change what happened. It'll just make the pain last longer. Maybe, but it'll also make sure everyone knows the truth. The truth is that marriages end. People change, grow apart, make mistakes. It doesn't have to be vindictive. Vindictive would be posting those hotel receipts on social media. Vindictive would be sending copies of Ember's affair photos to everyone at her law firm. Vindictive would be making sure Lennon's gambling debts became public knowledge." Patricia's expression sharpened. "Are you threatening my client?" "I'm explaining the difference between vindictive and fair." "What do you want?" "I want Ember to admit what she did. I want her to take responsibility for her choices, and I want a divorce settlement that reflects the actual contributions to this marriage." "She'll never admit fault." "Then we'll let a judge decide who's telling the truth." Patricia gathered her papers and stood up. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Reddan. This kind of public battle will hurt everyone involved. Everyone except the lawyers." She left without another word, and I sat in my office thinking about how far we'd all come from the night Ember tried to break up with me. What had started as a simple conversation about our marriage had turned into a full-scale war, with attorneys and private investigators and half the town choosing sides. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Saturday morning brought an unexpected development. I was having coffee at Mabel's diner when Vivian Stoll walked in, looking around nervously before spotting me in my usual booth. "Mason, could we talk?" "Thought we already did." "Please, it's important." I gestured to the seat across from me. Viv sat down carefully, like she was afraid I might bite. "Ember doesn't know I'm here," she said. "Okay." "I think you should know. She's planning something." "Such as?" "I don't know the details, but she's been meeting with some private investigator trying to dig up dirt on you." "What kind of dirt?" "Anything. Business irregularities, personal relationships, financial problems. She's convinced you must be hiding something." I sipped my coffee and considered this. Ember was fishing, hoping to find something she could use to shift the narrative back in her favor. "Why are you telling me this?" Viv looked uncomfortable. "Because I think she's going too far." "Too far how?" "She's talking about filing criminal charges, claiming you threatened her, maybe even claiming you hit her." My hand tightened on the coffee cup. "I never laid a finger on her." "I know, but she's desperate, and desperate people do stupid things." "Why do you care?" Viv was quiet for a long moment, staring out the diner window at the gray Ashfield morning. "Because I set this whole thing up," she said finally. I stared at her. "What?" "The affair. I introduced Ember to Lennon at a law firm party 6 months ago. I encouraged her to explore her options." "Why?" "Because you fired me." The pieces clicked into place. Vivian Stoll. I'd hired her as a part-time bookkeeper 3 years ago, and fired her 6 months later when I caught her skimming money from the business accounts. "You did this for revenge?" "I did it because you destroyed my reputation in this town. After you fired me, no one would hire me. I had to move away, start over. You were stealing from me." "I was borrowing. I would have paid it back." "With what?" "You were already behind on your rent." Viv's face flushed. "You could have been understanding. You could have worked with me. I could have pressed charges. Instead, you just ruined my life. I protected my business. And I protected mine." We stared at each other across the diner table, two people whose lives had intersected in the worst possible way. So, you decided to destroy my marriage. I decided to give Ember options. What she did with them was her choice. And Lennon? Was looking for a wealthy woman to solve his financial problems. I just made the introduction. Why are you telling me this now? Because Ember's talking about framing you for assault. And that's not justice. That's just vindictive. As opposed to destroying my marriage, which was justice, Viv looked away. I never thought it would go this far. You never thought about consequences at all. Maybe not, but I'm trying to make it right now. By warning me? By telling you the truth. I finished my coffee and stood up. The truth is that you're all liars and cheaters who deserve each other. Mason, thanks for the warning, but this doesn't make us even. I left Viv sitting in the diner and drove home, my mind racing. Ember was planning to escalate the conflict, possibly even filing false charges against me. That changed everything. Time to end this before it got completely out of hand. I spent the rest of Saturday and all day Sunday preparing for what I'd started thinking of as the final battle. If Ember wanted to play dirty, I'd show her what dirty really looked like. Monday morning, I called Jim Bradley and told him everything Viv had revealed. This is good, he said. If we can prove Ember's planning to file false charges, we can get ahead of it. How? By filing first, harassment charges, defamation, maybe even conspiracy if we can tie Viv's involvement to the original affair. I want to try something else first. What? I want to call their bluff. That evening, I sent a text message to Ember. We need to talk. Tonight. The house. Come alone. Her response came back quickly. Why? Because this ends tonight. An hour later, Ember's BMW pulled into the driveway. I watched from the living room window as she sat in her car for several minutes, probably working up the courage to face me. Finally, she got out and walked to the front door. I opened it before she could knock. Mason. Ember. She looked tired, older somehow. The stress of the last 2 weeks had taken its toll, adding lines around her eyes and a tightness to her mouth that hadn't been there before. You said this ends tonight. What did you mean? I meant exactly that. This war between us, the legal battles, the public humiliation, it ends tonight. How? I gestured toward the living room. Sit down, let's talk like adults. Ember followed me in but remained standing, too wary to relax. I know about Viv, I said. Her face went pale. What about Viv? I know she set up your affair with Lennon. I know she did it for revenge because I fired her for stealing. And I know you're planning to file false assault charges against me. Ember sank onto the couch, her composure finally cracking. Mason, I can explain. No need. I understand perfectly. You got played by someone who wanted to hurt me, and now you're in too deep to back out gracefully. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? You think Lennon loves you? He's broke, Ember. He owes money to people who break legs when they don't get paid. He needs your divorce settlement more than he needs you. That's not true. Ask him about his gambling debts. Ask him about the loan sharks who've been calling his office. Ember's face crumpled. How do you know all this? Because I've been paying attention, something you might want to try sometime. Mason, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, and now we have to deal with the consequences. What do you want? I pulled out a folder and set it on the coffee table between us. I want you to read this. Ember opened the folder and gasped. Inside were copies of every piece of evidence I'd collected. Hotel receipts, photographs, bank records, even transcripts of her phone conversations with Lennon that I'd recorded. This is everything, I said. Every lie, every betrayal, every dollar you spent on your affair, all documented, all admissible in court. You can't use this. I can, and I will, unless what? Unless you agree to my terms. Ember looked up from the folder, hope and fear warring in her expression. What terms? You admit what you did. Publicly. You take full responsibility for the affair and the end of our marriage. Mason, you drop all claims to spousal support, the business, and any assets that were mine before we married. I can't. You can, and you will. Because if you don't, I'll release everything in that folder to everyone in town. Your law firm, your parents, every client you've ever represented. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Ember stared at the folder like it contained a bomb. Which, in a way, it did. And if I agree, then we end this quietly. You get half the house, half our savings, and I keep the business. Clean, simple, done. What about Lennon? What about him? He'll be ruined if this comes out. He should have thought of that before he started sleeping with married women. Ember was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the weight of her choices finally hit her. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. But you did hurt me, and now you have to live with that. I made mistakes. You made choices, and choices have consequences. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where we'd lived for 20 years, where we'd been happy once upon a time. You have 24 hours to decide, I said without turning around. After that, everything in that folder becomes public record. Mason, please. 24 hours, Ember. Choose wisely. She gathered up the folder and left without another word, leaving me alone in a house that had once been our home and was now just the place where our marriage had finally completely ended. The next evening, Patricia Vance called. My client accepts your terms, she said. All of them? All of them. Good. Have the papers drawn up. Mr. Reddan, for what it's worth, I think you're being fair. I'm being practical. There's a difference. I hung up the phone and poured myself a whiskey, sitting in my recliner and looking around the living room that was finally completely mine. Outside, Ashfield settled into its usual evening rhythm. But inside, everything had changed. The war was over. I'd won. But victory felt a lot lonelier than I'd expected. 3 days later, I signed the divorce papers in Jim Bradley's office. Ember wasn't there. She'd signed her copies the day before and left town immediately afterward. Word was she'd taken a job with a law firm in Chicago, far away from Ashfield and the wreckage of her reputation. Lennon had disappeared too, reportedly fleeing to avoid his creditors when word of his debts became public. His Tesla was repossessed, his condo foreclosed on, and his job terminated for conduct unbecoming. Vivian Stoll had vanished entirely, probably realizing that her role in the whole mess wouldn't stay secret forever, and I was left alone in Ashfield, surrounded by the ruins of 20 years and the knowledge that sometimes winning means losing everything that mattered. But that's the thing about consequences. They don't care about your feelings. They just are what they are. And sometimes that has to be enough. The day Ember burned, she took our marriage with her. But I was still standing, and in the end, that was all that mattered.